Let's break the political talk show mold. Anything worth doing is hard, and that includes being a good citizen. Our mission is to help you be that better citizen by letting you hear about stuff you might not know, which will make everyone think you're so smart, or by giving you a chance to listen to interviews and debates on a wide variety of subjects that might actually allow you to form new opinions in the privacy of your own mind. I'm Justin Oldham, and you are listening to the Politics and Patriotism Show here on the Stitcher Smart Radio Network. Good morning, good evening, whenever you are, and welcome to a special YouTube archive edition of the Politics and Patriotism Show. We are reaching far back in time and digging very deep into our vaults to bring you the following interview. Every now and then again, some of the solid citizens we talk to eventually go on to do bigger and better things. In this case, the person whom we spoke to in May of 2011 eventually went on to write and publish a book. So they went from citizen to author. And now that that transition has taken place, we thought we would dig up the interview and share it with you. At the time we spoke to her, Nagel was a longtime federal civil service employee, and one of the things that she had most in common with many of us here at the show was a fondness for the space program. She liked anything and everything that had to do with space travel. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I have to tell you that we did know she was working on her book while we were having this interview, but the guys across the hallway here in the legal department said we couldn't think, say, or do anything that would give that secret away. So we had to stick to the topic at hand, which happened to be the very last flight of Space Shuttle Endeavor. So without any further delays, here is Nagel talking with us about the end of an era. For the record, I'd like to state that this is May 16th of 2011, and we've just seen the very last liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavor. And while I don't want to be entirely mournful, I would like to bring you a conversation with some perspective. Good afternoon, Anne. How are you?
I am not bad. How are you?
Staying out of trouble, but I'm feeling a little bit melancholy because as I got up this morning at 5 a.m. Alaska Standard Time, I had a chance to watch the Endeavor take off for the very last time. And I find it to be singularly depressing that we've only got one more space shuttle mission left, and then after that, the world's superpower has no more significant space program, and that's just that's an appalling turn of events for me. And
it is very sad.
It is. Now, before we go any further with this, I want to establish a few things for our listeners so that they know how credible you are here. Now, as I've said, you're a federal civil service employee.
Yes.
And how long have you been doing that?
For almost 36 years.
Okay, now that's important to this discussion because you have been employed, actively seeking a paycheck for a very large period of time during which the American space program has been active. So just out of curiosity, what were you doing in 1969, and do you remember the first moon landing?
I was much younger than I am now. I can recall I was in Western Washington, and I was with family, and I was always fascinated by the space program. As a matter of fact, when I was very young, you know, the Mercury, the Apollo, the Gemini missions fascinated me, and I wanted to be an astronaut. And of course, at the time, it was so cute. Oh, the little girl wants to be an astronaut. You know, it just wasn't done in that day.
That's true. The social values were a lot different back then. The role of women in society was a lot different back then. But if somebody had told you that eventually it would be common for women to go into space, I bet you it wouldn't have surprised you really that much.
No, and it would have inspired me a lot more.
Okay, now speaking of inspiration, when I think back to the moon landing, I think about the way that my parents introduced me to it. I mean, my dad got me out of bed at some unbelievably early hour and put me in front of the television and said, "You need to watch this. This is important." And I don't think there's any doubt that your parents and mine saw this event as being something very important and certainly a harbinger of a much brighter future.
Mm-hmm.
With that in mind, as a context for people of your generation and of my generation, I think that it's we can share a certain amount of commiseration here as we see the American Space Shuttle program winding down.
Yes, winding down with nothing else to replace it.
Well, the great irony is that there had been something to replace it, but the last two presidential administrations, being Bush 43 and Obama, they have both made a series of decisions which have effectively killed the shuttle replacement. And while they're all pleading budget, I can't help but think that there's not really much in the way of budget involved here, and that it's just dumb politics.
Oh, I'm sure. It isn't politically correct anymore. I've heard it said so many times, "Oh, well, we need to fix our own problems first." But it is actually true that let's just take the area of global warming. As we look at other planets and see how these other planets function, we can see how our planet functions better. So in doing the space exploration, we can bring it back home.
I like the sentiment there, but as you know, I have a very strong political science background, and the thing that actually concerns me is that if we don't do this, then somebody else is going to do this. And yes, I'm thinking of China. And the thing we have to remember about less democratic governments is that while we have a long storied tradition of making sure that everybody else gets their turn eventually at some point someday, that these more authoritarian regimes, they don't have that tradition. And once they do have control of the high ground in many cases, it is their preference to restrict access. And this is true. This is true in regards to society and economics, and I think it would be most certainly true in the case of space travel.
Oh, definitely. And once we relinquish our role, it's going to be a long time, and it's going to be a long, hard journey to try to get it back.
That's very true. I can recall back in 1997, they were discussing the potential replacement for the space shuttles at that time, and everybody still had the Challenger disaster in the back of their minds. That happened in 1986, as I recall, and it was at that point that the political establishment began to step forward and hem and haw about the need to do other things with the dollars than the replacement. And I can recall watching C-SPAN actually at that point in time, which was still relatively new in the context of the mainstream media. And there were actually NASA administrators saying, the shuttles are doing fine, they're low mileage, they don't have too many dings on the doors, we can get another 10 years out of these things. And I was just flabbergasted by that because this agency was undermining its own future.
Yeah, but what they were trying to do is to say, well, we're not going to take too much money. Don't worry about us.
The thing that's so shocking about this is in the era of the $3 trillion budget, the requirements to fund NASA are just petty by concern. I mean, we're talking about an agency that currently runs on something like $6.5 billion a year, and it's worth noting that the National Transportation Safety Commission, these are the people that run the traffic safety ads on television. You know, they spend $6 billion on TV commercials approximately every 12 years. So it seems like because space travel has become politically incorrect, you know, we are, I think, going to pay a heavy price in the future, and by that specifically, I mean, you know, the Chinese and other countries, because we have to remember that the Chinese are not the only ones who look into space and see opportunity.
Oh, that's true.
Now, thinking back to the early days of the Space Shuttle program, there was a lot of talk at that point in time that these weren't really space shuttles, that they were space trucks, and that we would possibly be building larger space trucks, and that simply hasn't happened yet. But I would like to bring a small ray of sunshine to this conversation by pointing out that while the Obama administration has done its fair share to drive a stake through the heart of NASA, they have also at least paid substantial lip service to the idea of the private sector moving in to take over space launch operations. And at this point, as far as I'm concerned, that's just lip service. But I do think that it's inevitable that the laws will be changed by the end of this decade. By 2020, you're probably going to see private sector space launch operations that happen so frequently that they won't even be recorded by the news media.
Yes, I think that that could very well be the way we go, because like you just said, NASA is, shall we call it, winding down?
Point. I think that if what I fully expect in our lifetime, both yours and mine, NASA will go from being the space program to being the space police.
Probably more the regulatory agency. I could see where they would be, you know, like who gets to go, are you following their regulations, et cetera, something like that.
That's it. You know, I was citing 1997 for another important reason. It was also in that calendar year that we first heard about the creation of the Kodiak Space Launch Complex here in Alaska, down on Kodiak Island. And although I wouldn't be able to get to it for another 10 years, you know, that's when I first thought about the concept that was eventually going to lead to my first piece of science fiction, Tales from the Kodiak Starport. And so as relatively unknown as I still am today, I can see how 10 years from now, when that space launch complex is much more privatized than it is today, and much larger than it is today, much busier than it is today, that might actually give me a small footnote in the history books.
Oh, yes. You know, I can foresee if what you have talked about comes to pass, with NASA becoming more just an oversight kind of agency, the Kodiak Starport could very well become a reality. That would be interesting.
I'm looking forward to it. And I'm also looking forward to having certain arguments with the international community, because while NASA is winding down, the day of the Space Shuttle is at hand. Very soon here in the month of July, Atlantis will fly for the last time, and that'll be the end of that. But as we shift gears, as we let the private sector run wild, there will be a lot of criticism from the international community, and our nearest and dearest trading partner being, you know, the European Union. I expect them to have a lot to say about the way that those American space cowboys are just running wild in low orbit. And it wouldn't surprise me if the next great political conspiracy moves beyond the New World Order to something like the New Space Order, or even perhaps domination of the solar system by a select political elite that nobody knows about, and eventually they'll be deciding who goes to the moon, who goes to Mars. You'll probably have a handful of Alex Jones types who are saying that there are already secret baby factories on the moon, and just all kinds of wild stuff.
Oh, boy. Oh, well, there's also the plains of Cydonia. Don't forget that.
That's true. And you and I both remember Mr. Richard C. Hoagland back in the 1970s talking about the faces of Mars. And now, back in those days, you used to see commercials on TV for his Faces of Mars seminar, which was at that point sold on VHS cassette. And now today, Mr. Hoagland has moved on to other things. And the reason that I bring him up is that in terms of contemporary conspiracy theorists, he tends to be the most political, and I being the politics junkie that I am, I'm actually looking forward to seeing what the next generation of space politics is going to be like.
That is interesting. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head right there. Who gets to go? Where do they get to go? And how far do they get to colonize? Like
we're not going to see that. We're not going to see that in our lifetime. But the question of Mars does, bring that up, because we know now, based on the facts at hand, we have the technology today that if we had the will, we could colonize Mars. So 100 years in the future, when our technology base is radically more advanced than it is today, then I can actually see having the colonization debate.
Mm-hmm. If we still have the will. And that is a very big if.
Now, as you look back over your 36 years of service, looking at the changes that have happened in federal civil service, how likely is it, do you think, that just within the institution of federal civil service that we lose our will to do these things?
Oh, well, what I see is a lot more don't buck the system. Don't ask questions. Trust the data, but can you trust the inputter?
That makes sense to me because, as many of our audience members know, I used to be in federal civil service myself, and okay, sure, the idea of data entry or data input, that is something of that's something of an old school term, but the truth.
But then I am old school.
Oh yeah, but your point is still valid because, as we might say here in the 21st century world, garbage in equals garbage out. And what factors do you see that we might change to rewrite this potential prognostication? What changes have to happen in American civil service so that we can avoid that fate?
One thing I see is data standardization. One of the problems we had with one of the Mars landers was some of the data was in meters, some of the data was in feet.
I remember talking with people about that at the time, and the discrepancy seemed absolutely hilarious. You would think that NASA, of all institutions, could avoid making that mistake, but it certainly does make the point. And I think that that's the new role for NASA, is to ensure that standardization, because nobody has the institutional knowledge that they have, and ultimately, since they won't be able to practice their craft anymore, they will at least be able to administer their craft.
Right. And I have seen that just in my dealings in what I do. Sometimes you've got to put this in, sometimes you've got to put that in, but it equals the same thing. more data standardization is necessary.
Okay, now just for the sake of posterity, because these podcasts tend to live forever on the internet, I'd like to ask you, do you happen to remember the Enterprise controversy back in the earliest days of the Space Shuttle program?
The Enterprise controversy. Well, I do recall that the original, it was like a mock-up. A model version, I guess you would call it. And they named it the Enterprise because of a certain series on TV.
You're listening to another Politics and Patriotism podcast. Find us online through iTunes. That's true. Now, personally, I think the Trekkies got robbed because that mock-up was nothing more than a test bed. It's what the NASA guys called at that time a lifting body. It was a very expensive training glider, and I can see how they would want to name it, but given the fan base of Star Trek, even in today's world, I still say that those people got robbed, and whatever the next future generation of space shuttle replacement is, that they're probably going to lobby very hard for some kind of for some kind of enterprise, whatever it happens to be. And the reason that I am bringing this up is because I want to shift gears here, and I want to talk about an aspect of contemporary spacefaring life that no other commentators are kicking around right now, and that's the thing of popular culture as it relates to space. Not only have we seen a decline in NASA, but I would submit to you that in the last 5 years in particular, that we've also seen a decline in the number of spacefaring science fiction novels that have been published, and we've also seen a significant decline in the number of science fiction TV shows that portray space travel.
Mm-hmm. That's true, because people aren't interested in it. It's more like, been there, done that. But we haven't actually been there and done that yet, have we?
That, unfortunately, is true. Now, as an author who deals in speculation, I like to think that anybody who puts pen to paper and bothers to publish it is taking a snapshot of the times in which they live and then offering social commentary on that. So I can see why this trend is the way it is, but I'm still willing to register my disaffection, my dissatisfaction, because even though I was just 4 years old in 1969, the events of the early space program, and then later on when I was in college, the events of the space shuttle program, they were so inspiring to me that, as you alluded to for yourself, they encouraged me to do things that I probably would not have otherwise done, and that's one of the reasons why I think we're losing out on something very important here.
You're very correct there. Just the ability to hope and dream. All I see, for instance, you were talking about science fiction. All I see is like mummies and vampires and whatever, And how does that encourage a person to hope and dream?
Now, the author in me feels compelled to come to the defense of the mummies and vampires, and I would like to point out that in much of this contemporary fantasy romance, is what the industry is now calling it, that there is an optimistic undertone. It's the idea that love conquers all, but it's all nice and fine and well that love conquers all. But love can conquer all, and we can still be marooned on this planet, if you know what I mean.
Right. Love doesn't get us into space.
That's very true. And as we come into the final minutes of the program here, I want to go back to the point that is perhaps the most important to me, is that as an American, in this decade, I still say it matters who goes into space first. It matters who ends up being the gatekeeper of space, and ultimately, it does matter who, who's the referee, who makes the rules, and if okay, sure, there's some globalists out there who are going to say, it's humanity, stupid. It's not just the Americans, but we are
and
as
if you take a very pie-in-the-sky view, that's true. But the thing is, if a certain somebody, and you probably know who I'm talking about, a certain group, gets there first, they can say, okay, the U.S. doesn't get to go. And then what happens to us? We are totally cut out of at least that portion of history.
And that's an important point. Now, ultimately, I think that humanity's place is among the stars, and that we may get there in fits and starts, but ultimately we're going to get there.
And it's important that even though it may be in fits and starts, that we make the journey.
Well, that's very true. I agree with that entirely. I mean, as I sit here now, thinking about it just off the top of my head, the ways in which I have benefited from the space program, it's a very long list. I mean, I'm using medical technologies right now that are spin-offs from the space age, and as a matter of fact, the computer on my desk, the phone in your hand right now, these are deliberate byproducts of the space age, and without those technological advancements, we would be having this conversation over somebody's backyard fence, because there would be no other way for these things to happen.
That is so true. I mean, for instance, just the microwave that you heat up your TV dinner in, the Mylar that you take off the TV dinner before you heat it up, etc., etc. All of that is because we wanted to explore. It wasn't because, oh, well, let's just stay in our little rock.
Okay, now we've got about 2 minutes left, and just for fun, because these podcasts often end up being little time capsules, I would like you to make a prediction. Here we are in 2011. What's the world of space travel going to look like in 2111? You and I will obviously not be here to see it, but I want you to just take a guess.
Oh, heavens. I couldn't even begin to think, because like I spoke about earlier, back in the Mercury and Gemini programs, I couldn't have even dreamed of the Space Shuttle program. And so something in 2111 is going to be so fantastic. They will probably have some sort of a drive, something to get them out beyond the gravity well that I couldn't even dream of. But it's going to be fantastic. That I will say for sure. Only if we get ourselves moving to actually do it.
Ann K. Nagel's book is entitled Journey to Azelfafage. You can find it through your favorite online booksellers. We hope you've enjoyed this YouTube exclusive, which has been brought to you by the Politics and Patriotism Show. You can find us online at politicsandpatriotism.com, or you can subscribe to us through the Stitcher Smart Radio Network. Find them online at stitcher.com. Download their free apps and listen to our most recent programming for free.